Hey everybody, we're back. This is talk number 5 in the Intro to Environmental Science. And today we're going to be talking about consumption and ecological footprints. You may remember that last time, oh yeah, by the way, I'm in my car. I'm traveling around checking out the environmental problems of Washington, D.C. I'm by the Fort Totten recycling station, and yeah, it's a mess. So you should go check it out someday yourself. Anyway, last time we talked about definitions of sustainability, and in those definitions, one of the things that kept being mentioned was the need to change consumption patterns. So I want to talk a little bit about consumption to start today's talk. So we all know what consumption is, but in environmental science, we think about it as the quantity of resources used by each person. Just as we did with resources, we can divide consumption into sustainable use and unsustainable use. There's sustainable consumption and unsustainable consumption. I think you intuitively have a feel for what that means. Currently, highly developed countries contain 20% of the world's population. So the most advanced economies contain 20% of the world's populations, yet they consume more than half of the world's resources. World Watch has calculated that highly developed countries use 86% of the aluminum, 76% of the timber, 68% of the energy, 61% of the meat, and 42% of the fresh water on the planet. Now, that's impressive, right? Can you see why this is unsustainable? Does that make sense to you? Hopefully it does. Hopefully we don't have to explain that. But if we do, let us know. Can you also see why the United Nations and their view of sustainability included social equity in their view of a sustainable future and sustainable development? That seems to make a lot more sense now, doesn't it? Can you see why many believe that some sort of global government must be part of a sustainable future? If we have nation states that look out only for themselves, who then is going to look out for the entire Earth and all the nations on Earth, the powerful nations and the less powerful ones? So what we want to do now is connect consumption to sustainability in a more concrete way. And one way that that's been done is by looking at the ecological footprint. So what is the ecological footprint? Well, it's the amount of productive land, fresh water, and ocean required on a continuous basis to supply a person with food, wood, energy, water, housing, clothing, transportation, and waste disposal. And this concept was made up by two Dutch environmental economists named Mathis Wackernagel, that's a heck of a name, and William Rees. These researchers looked at consumption on a global basis, and what they found is that the average global ecological footprint is 2.7 hectares. That's what HA stands for, hectares. Let's back up. Let's look at what this means. A hectare is a unit of land area. It's about the size of 2 football fields, or about 2.4 acres, if you want to use the system you're more familiar with. So what they're saying is that each person on the globe, in order to supply their needs, on average needs 2.7 of these hectares, which is almost 6 football fields of land and ocean. So how much is actually available to each person, right? We want to contrast what is available on Earth as opposed to what we use. And here's a stunning thing. To calculate this, we first need to find the total number of productive hectares on Earth, and then we need to divide that total by the population to get the number of hectares allotted to each person. And if you look at the table to the right, here's the 11.4 billion productive hectares. Here's the number that we actually use. And here is the number that is actually available. In other words, each person is consuming from more hectares than are available. So how is that possible? Well, you know how it's possible. You might want to stop the video right now. Take a pause. Think about it for a second. Figure out how that could be, right? And think about the definition of sustainability. I'll give you time to pause. Okay, you're back. Did you figure out, did you remember that expression that we have to live on income and not on savings? And if you did, then you're on the right track, because human beings have been using the Earth's resources at greater than their productivity. We've been dipping into the incredible storehouse of resources that is built up over the hundreds of millions of years before humans became an important species on Earth. Now, there is a wide disparity of ecological footprints globally. You probably guessed that already. Have you ever seen this project? This was a book, I think it was called Everything I Own, and it was a book where this photographer went around the world and found median income families for that country and had them pull everything they owned out into the front yard, and the most important things were to be put right in front of the family. So you can see all these bowls that they eat from, and perhaps some teapot here, and perhaps some sacred objects. This might be a hookah. Back here we've got some tubers, it looks like, and then all the other stuff in their house. And this is from Bhutan, I believe. This is a median income family in Bhutan. These are herders. And in contrast, we have a family from Texas. And here you go. There's the family from Texas, median income. This project was probably done in the late 80s, early 90s. And most important, yes, indeed, the Holy Bible. There it is. And what's going on down here? I just don't know. The dog has its most important item, too. At any rate, wide disparity, as we'll see as we go through the course. Okay, so now I want to present ecological footprint in another way. Oh, you may have noticed that I've changed locations. Yeah, I decided to go to another environmental hotspot in the district. I'm now at Murray School, where members of the DEQ, that's the Department of Environmental Quality, have discovered an excessive release of hot air. So I'm there checking it out, and you probably should check that out too, see what's causing all that hot air to be released. At any rate, here's another way to think about ecological footprint. How much of the Earth's annual production of resources does the world population actually use? Well, in 2007, which is the most recent data I have output for, the total ecological footprint was 1.5 Earths. Okay, so that means that humanity used resources 1.5 times as fast as they could be renewed by the planet. You're probably realizing that's not good. Yeah, it's unsustainable. Unsustainable equals the footprint is larger than the biological, physical, and chemical capacity for replenishment. Does that make sense to you? Good, I hope so. Okay, just a few more things today. Here is a picture of the growth of the ecological footprint over time. And I want you to notice that the date when the Earth's productive capacity was reached was in the late 1980s, somewhere around 1985, 1986. And it's been pretty much linear growth till the year about 2008 when this graph was made. And the two paths on the right, the linear continuation of unsustainable living, is the projection if we don't do anything. And the projection below it, the sustainable living, was a projection made by Wackernagel and Rees, saying, here's what we could do if we just implement certain things now. And clearly by 2020, we're not going to be back under the 1 Earth threshold. So I hope you understand this graph, that this graph is telling you about the growth in the ecological footprint over time. Above it, we have some interesting statistics on a national level. We contrast over here on the left the total ecological footprint in millions of hectares for each country. And you'll notice that the United States' footprint is huge compared to the entire European Union even. It's large, and compared to China. And other large countries that have large footprints are India and Japan, and we're very large in comparison to them. And we can then ask, well, what is the per capita ecological footprint? In other words, on average, how much does each person use? So you take the footprint and divide it by the population. And here we see the United States, once again, is not looking so good. 9.7 hectares per person in the United States. In the European Union, it's about half that. Japan, it's about half that. And look at India. India is under the 1 hectare level. Remember that we have about 1.6 hectares per person on Earth. India's at half that level. But the population is so huge that the total ecological footprint is fairly sizable. Japan, on the other hand, has a fairly hefty per person footprint, but a small population and a shrinking population that gives it the smallest on this graph. Moving on, this is a map of the places in the world that are biocapacity debtors and biocapacity creditors. And this is just looking at the biological capacity of the land. And you can see that the United States and the European Union and China and India, parts of Central Asia, are all debtors. And then much of the rest of the world, Canada, most of South America, Australia, most of tropical Africa, are actually biocapacity creditors. They can produce more biologically than they use. It's just another interesting way to look at it, and it doesn't look at the entire ecological footprint just on the biocapacity. And let me point out that the Mediterranean countries in Africa are debtors because they have a very low productive capacity, because most of the country is the Sahara Desert. I could look at this graph all day. You probably don't want to, but I thought it might be of interest to you. Let's move on. Finally, I have shown here the mathematical relationship between the national footprint and the per capita footprint. So the mathematical equation is the national footprint equals the per capita footprint times the population. Now, do you need to remember that? I don't know if you need to remember that. I think you should be able to rederive it. If you can remember that per capita footprint means the footprint per person, and if you can remember that multiplying that by the population of a place would therefore logically give you the total footprint, then you don't need to memorize this. You can always rederive this for yourself. If that's difficult for you, then you would need to memorize it. But I recommend that you always go for rederiving it rather than memorizing it. And below here I have two graphics showing the per capita footprint of India, France, and the United States. And look at that, they've done in ascending order. But when you look at the total ecological footprint of the country, India's is large and larger than France, but not nearly as large as the United States. And so that just goes to show you that there are different ways to deal with this problem. You can reduce population size, you can reduce consumption as a main way of reducing per capita ecological footprint. Now, that's the end of today's talk. And tomorrow what we're going to go on to do is we are going to look at what are the commonly asserted causes of environmental problems. And it says 5 here, but I seem to remember that I've now got it up to 6, and I don't think I changed that number. So we'll see next time whether it's 5 or 6. And in the outro, I leave you with a quotation from Matisse Wackernagel for your cerebral pleasure. Until next time, study hard.